Hi everyone, welcome to today's lesson. This is the fourth part in a series on making a master copy in oils. So hopefully you'll have watched the first three parts where I kind of went over how you go about choosing a master copy. So choosing a piece that you actually want to copy, the reasons for choosing or for doing a master copy. In the second lesson we looked at, once you've selected one, how you can analyze it, what you can learn from it, and then that kind of allows you to figure out how you're going to start your painting, which is what we did last week. So last week we looked at, in this instance I'm doing a copy of an Odeon Redon painting of butterflies in a kind of surrealist, semi-surrealist, symbolist landscape. So I'd kind of investigated what kind of ground colour, which was this sort of burnt umber wash. And then last week we just started blocking in the main shapes, because I decided that the way that it's been applied, it's all very the way that he seems to have painted it, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for their approach. Is not too layered. It seems quite kind of he paints it in the moment and doesn't do too many corrections. It's all kind of very vivid the way that he works. So that's what we're trying to capture. What I'm trying to capture with this piece. And I said last week that I was going to focus on either the land or the sky, but I was doing them as separate subjects. So I'm going to start. This is based on the idea that the butterflies are actually painted over the top, which is what I think was done in this piece. So I'm going to start just by painting in the sky, but omitting the butterflies, which I'll just move a little bit closer. Whoop, lost it. So you can see here, once it exposes correctly. I'm just going to be working in the sky region, and these butterflies will be painting later over the top. So I'm not going to focus too much on them today. I'm just going to think about the shapes of the sky, and if I zoom in, I'm kind of going for that texture that we have in the original. So what really matters with these master copies is kind of thinking about how the texture of the paint works, trying to think about what sorts of brushes to use. And I'm also going to be thinking about what colours to use, which I'm going to just start talking about right now. So I had a look over the painting and decided to use two blues. So I've got ultramarine and Prussian on my palette. I've got black, which is a kind of grey blue. Burnt umber, just because it is present in the rest of the piece, so I'd imagine that he would have used it. Otherwise, there might not be that much use of burnt umber in this this part of the painting, just because it's quite blue and yellow. But possibly some of these kind of purpley hues maybe would require it. But there isn't too much red generally in this sky. And then I've also got a little bit of cad yellow and yellow ochre for these more yellowy sections, and of course titanium white as my white. So those are the colours that I'm using. I'm then using a little bit of mineral spirits and oil, mostly mineral spirits. As my medium, but I probably won't be using a lot because I think it's applied quite thickly and kind of dragged over. So the three brushes that I've chosen to use are two very old brushes that are very stiff. You can kind of hopefully see how stiff and aged these. And this one's less so. These two brushes are, and then I've got a kind of newer bristle as well. But I want to use bristles because the paint's quite thick and it's dragged over. So not something I've gone into a lot in any of the videos so far, but the choice of type of hair that you use in your brush will affect the nature of your painting. So if you're working on a rougher canvas, and this isn't actually a super rough canvas, but the original was painted on a rough canvas, and I probably could have done with something rougher, but this is what I had in the studio. If you use a bristle, you can kind of penetrate that canvas more. You kind of need to build paint up over it because it's got a lot of texture to it. Whereas you can see this is another painting behind that I've taped over. The linen that I've used for this painting is much finer, and so you can use a softer brush. It won't just kind of drag over the top. If you use a soft brush on a coarse canvas, it isn't able to penetrate the grain, so it just kind of skims over the top. A bit like when you use a blunt pencil over toothy paper like watercolor paper, you'll see it goes all speckledy, which we don't want. So we want to kind of start loading the paint up. This piece has quite a lot of paint built up. There are sections where the ground color shows through, but nonetheless the paint is where the paint is. It's pretty built up. So the first thing I'm going to do is just sketch in the general shape of the clouds. So I'm going to use this slightly smaller brush, mix up a kind of tiny grey blue colour. And just kind of have a think about how high up that first set of clouds goes. There, and it slopes back up here. I'm just going through and sketching these clouds out. And I'm not going to worry too much about being perfectly accurate with these shapes, because for one, clouds are pretty loose things at the best of times, and also this particular painting I think was painted quite loosely. Certainly wasn't painted kind of obsessively. Yeah, so I've got now just going to generally sketch in an idea of where these clouds will go. I'm going to switch back to these broader brushes. I might start with the rougher one and just see how I get on. And I'll begin by mixing up this kind of greenish colour. So I'll take this blue. So, no, that's too bright, so we're going to drop its value down a bit. Yeah, it's not too bad actually, that colour there. So you can see I'm just going for that kind of greeny bluish colour. As it progressively moves up this side, I'm going to start to want to switch into more of a yellowy colour. So looks like I'm going to pretty much reach it with this yellow ochre, maybe mix a little bit of OCAD yellow. I'm going to need to get some more paint out of my palette. Ended up more kind of greeny yellow down in that section than I was expecting. Get a bit more OCAD yellow. And some yellow ochre as well. A little bit of kind of another blue showing through the gap between the two clouds. So you went a bit too bright with that, so mixed in some black just to tone it down. So I'm partially looking at the shapes, but I'm also spending a lot of time trying to figure out all the little colour shifts and so on. Because because there is a sort of broken colour effect in this piece, where we've got kind of blues and yellows next to each other, kind of vibrating a bit, and that's a nice effect within the piece. So it's coming along alright so far. What I might do, because these blues kind of start to mix together, I'm going to get them to sort of circle up and around. So there's a strong blue, a strong sort of greeny blue, here. That's not a bad approximation. Possibly slightly too bright, but I'm going to leave it at that and I'll tone it back, these colours, possibly in the next pass over them. So I'm finding this this approach with this brush is working pretty well to capture the feeling of the original piece. I'm quite happy with that. Broken my wrist doing this piece because the this brush is so stiff. It's getting the right effect, so I'm happy with how it's looking. It is tough to work with. So now looking for this kind of main cloud, I suppose it feels like, kind of central cloud that sort of straddles everything else. There are some interesting bits of cloud. higher up. So now we're above this cloud. We're going back to a kind of more of a greeny blue colour above, just before reaching these quite interesting shapes, which will be one of the last things I do. I'm going to try to get all these colours sort of generally blocked in with the right kinds of textures. And then go in and do some highlights as well. So we're getting pretty close to having this all blocked in. Certainly sufficient for this stage, I think. And it's not gonna, as I say, it's not gonna require a lot more work. Some things you're gonna have to do. Obviously, you do a lot more work after this point, but a lot more of this piece will actually be kind of building up those butterflies over the top, kind of looking at their details and aspects of them. So getting pretty close with that. Just as a general kind of shift, I would say I've got a lot of mineral spirits on that brush. There's a little bit more of a kind of yellowish shift up kind of from this point, but I don't want it to go kind of too orangey yellow. Sorry, too much of a greenish yellow. It's a bit better. Try to get that to fade up and mix down into here a bit more. So that's pretty good, I think, as far as what I'm after. The last thing I want to do, I've got my newer, softer bristle here, and there are a few points where I want to just get some kind of more slightly brighter cloud shining through. Kind of just makes his way up behind this bright cloud. And there's a few kind of notches of it. That kind of glisten over the top as well, kind of little patches down here a little bit. And then finally, I'm going to get these kind of little bright sections of cloud that sit over the top. I can now go back to these blues. Kind of fill in the gap between those clouds. And that's pretty close to being it, I think, for this pass. We don't want to overwork it because we'll start blocking over the ground colour, which is something we didn't want to do. We want bits of that brown showing through because it shows through in the original. It's quite an important aspect of the technique. Could do with some of these kind of shapes of the clouds and some of the transitions being improved, but I'm not going to do a great deal more blending. As it's wet, we'll kind of do some passes over the top, I think. Probably paint in the butterfly, or paint in the landscape, and we'll paint in the butterflies, and then kind of go and do kind of a second pass over things that we want to add more detail to. So I'm just going to have a quick zoom in, shift the camera around before I stop, so you guys can get a better idea of how it looks relative to the original. It's probably difficult to keep the original in your head. Do a little bit of blending with the kitchen towel, just for a slightly different effect. Some sections I want to just soften off slightly. I'll lift the camera up. So, let's pop the camera off the tripod here. So there you go, that's it kind of roughed in as a sky. So you can see, if I go from this angle, some of the paint texture. So I'm going for something pretty thickly laid on. I'm trying to capture this effect in the original. So I'm reasonably happy with the colour matching. Some of it maybe not quite kind of greenish enough, but fairly happy with how that went, and we can make some corrections, some glazes later. But yeah, that's all you're after really at that stage of the master copy. So it's totally different to how I'd normally work. My own landscapes are kind of very differently executed. But the point of this exercise is to just kind of experiment with a new style, see if you can try to appropriate a style and learn more about how that person worked, which is why you tend to go for something that interests you. But yeah, I'm fairly happy with the general effect. Certainly not quite as good as the original, but the point of a master copy is that you generally won't quite get as good an effect as a genius painter. But hopefully you'll learn something through it, and you'll end up being fairly happy with what you complete. So next week when we come back, I'll be doing kind of building in the landscape below, which might take one or kind of two passes, possibly maybe two different sessions. And then we'll be adding in these butterflies and then kind of going over. So we've got a few more lessons left in this series, but hopefully we'll be able to cover a few different techniques. But today was certainly different. I was using a much thicker bristle. You could see that I really had to punch into the canvas to get that paint to lay on, and I ended up with a much thicker, kind of rougher application than I would typically get the way that I work or have worked in a lot of the other videos. So hopefully that was useful, and I will see you guys soon.